Welcome back to Season 5 of CX in the Wild, where we capture conversations with the leading voices of customer experience from around the world.
Let's start with who you are and what you do.
Perfect. So I'm Kendall Rynders. I currently look after human experience at Ask Africa. And basically that is everything to do with CX, EX, UX, all of the X's. And really what I actually do, if I go to the core of it, is my tagline is tapping into potential. So I look at the potential in all of the experiences that we provide and then really try to figure out how to enable that and how to unbox it, basically.
That's beautiful.
And I'm Maria Petousis, executive at Ask Africa, who's responsible for benchmarks, services. And really what I love about our offering is enabling businesses and organizations to better understand customers, their changing needs, the changing landscape in South Africa, and ultimately what the expectations are from customers to better deliver experience.
Awesome. You know, what I know about South Africa, what I know about Africa and CX that you may not even, you know it, but you don't think about it every day, is if you had to pick the capital of customer experience innovation of the world, it would be you. And here's why. And I don't say that to every country. Every country has a different thing that's awesome about it. But in a country or a land with people who live on less than $1,000 a month, and that $1,000 a month is actually split up amongst a community of people, families. Those buyers are very thrifty and savvy, and their need states are so acute that to be in the customer experience industry to meet that market's needs or potential requires a level of innovation that is unprecedented anywhere else in the world. And so it's my honor to speak to both of you about the work that you do. But I do think it's important for the audience to understand when they hear you speak about things, it's not in the context of a US market. It's in the context of the highest degree of intimacy that business people can have in a healthy way with customers comes from the work you do. Yeah. So with that said, tell me about that. Am I right or am I wrong?
Yes, you're absolutely right. And I really think it is about understanding a customer's life and ultimately what their expectations would be based on the life that they're living. And ultimately, what we measure through our benchmarking, the Ask Africa Orange Index being a core metric, is really understanding the dynamics between customer experience from a functional perspective and an emotional perspective. And we see over time that customers' emotional needs are less met. And the reason I say that is because they're constantly evolving. And if we're not at the forefront of understanding those evolving customer expectations, there's no way that any brand or service organization could actually meet them. So in the landscape of a digital world, which is trying, of course, to better service customers, there still is this emotional void which customers are requiring. And it's so important to keep in touch of that.
I want to get underneath that a little bit. When you talk about this emotional void, I think that it's easy to hear those words, but I think what you're describing is there is a sense of immediacy of duress that happens to Africans in unexpected times, not maybe continuously. And I think that if you looked at it at a wider aperture, you would see that as a whole, Africans are emerging and their resilience is paying off. And you see the momentum and the growth. So I think from a broad statistical perspective, you may say, well, emotions are getting better. But I don't think that that tells the whole story. I think that the unexpected duress, the unplanned for, and even from my experience, having been in this market for just a few days, talking to a wide range of people, it's almost it's even worse because there's expected challenges, but they come at a time that you can't plan for. And so these emotional signals that you're measuring, how do you measure them and where do they come from?
So the way we measure emotional satisfaction is essentially asking customers from their service experience, how did they feel? And we can see that over time, well, in the last annual survey that we did, it did increase a little bit, but there's still that void which customers are experiencing. And that really just comes from changing expectations over time based on their life-centric model. So ultimately, if we looked at the key drivers of service a couple of years ago, it was immediacy of servicing customers, whereas now we need to service customers conveniently at their own time or on their own terms.
Well, that right there is a mark of lesser desperation, which I think speaks to more holistic
it's progress.
Future progress.
Yeah, I think that there's been quite a bit of progress. I do think that I was in quite an interesting conversation the other day. So a lot of people do immigrate from South Africa, and then they experience different things in different countries. And one of my friends she immigrated to Canada, and she was saying that for her, one of the key differences is in South Africa, there's this feeling of fear constantly. And I think it sort of relates back to what you were mentioning earlier, that we're very resilient. People have become very resilient, but we often don't realize the amount of sort of stress that we're under, very, very different stress. So as you say, it can be very unexpected. So we might have like a load shedding schedule, but whether that's going to play out the way that it's supposed to or not, we don't really know. Sometimes you just don't have electricity and you need to figure out ways to sort of navigate that. I also think that if we look at emotion as a construct, it's incredibly complex, and often people aren't able to even name their own emotions. And now we're expecting servicing people or people in the front line to deliver according to this emotional relationship and that, but they might in some cases not have the skills to actually be self-aware, be aware of their own emotions. And it's one of the other things that we're also sort of looking at, not only from a insights perspective. Yes, emotion is very important, it's more important, but we really as a business go into organizations to enable the implementation of these things that we mentioned. So one of the interesting sort of measurements that I've read up on and we're sort of investigating for some of our clients is asking frontline staff after an interaction to name the emotion that the customer is feeling, but then also name their reaction to that. Their reaction to the emotion. Because through that, it enables self-awareness. They learn how to pick up the emotion, but they also learn how they are responding to the emotion that's put in front of them. And it just enables them to provide a different experience. And it also grows them at the same time. So you're feeding into them at the same time, which is incredibly important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is, that's kind of profound. Here's where my mind goes on that. So I have a program. I'm doing it with the Western Cape government. After the event, I'm going to be doing that on Thursday. But I offer it to you as like peer-to-peer brainstorming. We're always looking for ways. You and just full disclosure on Mike, I'm going to steal your idea. But let's
You're more than welcome to. We're all in this together.
Let's co-create. Here's 2 programs that I do that are on the other end of the spectrum of this genius thing you're talking about. So on Thursday, I have a program in my playbook that I call the CX SWOT analysis. Okay? Here's all it is. It's not the traditional SWOT, but the SWOT is a great recognizable thing to executives. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. But here's the twist. I have the executives do the SWOT on one side of the room, and I have the customers do the SWOT on the other side of the room. So they don't, as you can imagine, they don't have the same strengths or weaknesses. You know, the coming together there creates a opportunity for a new dialogue to happen where a previous conversation was fully entrenched. Yeah. So I think that there is another way to do that with customers and agents in terms of some sort of parallel path conversation and then uniting them during a workshop, I think would have a similar.
Definitely. You know what, I was actually thinking about it on the way here. We always speak to businesses and we say you need to put the customer at the center of your world, whether that is a B2B customer or a B2C customer. You have to put them at the center of your business. It needs to be an outside-in approach, so you're customer-led. But often we don't step fully into the shoes of the customer we're serving. And then just speaking to what you were mentioning, we don't experience that awareness gap. So what is the awareness gap that currently exists between what I think my customers are experiencing? Yes, maybe based off of feedback that's coming through from your voice of customer, or feedback that's coming through from various insights. So it's not founded in a subjective, I think my customers feel this. You're basing it on a few different things, because we are, most of us know what we're doing in terms of customer experience, or most of us do. If you look at the awareness gap, there's always this gap between what we think they're experiencing and what they're actually experiencing. And I think what you just mentioned, it would enable that. It would uncover the gap. And it's almost, you always want to find those light bulb moments. Okay, so if I really experience this as a customer without knowing what my business processes are, what realizations would I have? And in doing what you're doing, you're actually uncovering that just on the opposite side of the room. So
we're uncovering this together. Yeah. This has turned into a work session. I feel like this would be a recorded Zoom call. Here, I'm getting invigorated.
I'll send you meeting minutes.
Yeah. Well, I'm recording. So here's I'll do the administrative minutes. The thing I want to say about that is, okay, let's unpack yet again. I was going to tell you about another activity that I do. Yeah. And I don't know if you're like reading my mind, but you are, you're synthesizing the other thought. And I'd like to share it with both of you so that we can come out of this with a new branded, our collaborative workshop. The other thing I've done is at McDonald's. I just put up on the wall a day, so every hour of the day, 6 a.m., 6 p.m. or whatever. Maybe it was 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. But the hours that McDonald's was open, and I did these, and I did 2 rows, and I had the customers come over and tell me what they're doing each hour that day and when their buying occasion was, throughout the day, what they were doing. And then I covered those up, Post-it notes up, and then I had the owner operators come and do the same thing. And then I just revealed that the owner operators didn't always have the buying time right, nor did they have the preceding activities. So that's another version of what we're just saying. But I want to throw this to you, and then you can synthesize it. When you talk about the gap, I'll summarize it in this metaphor. We talk a lot about empathy being walking a mile in our customer's shoes. But what everyone focuses is on being in the customer's shoes and not the mile walk.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So it's so funny that you use, sorry, Maria, I'm just jumping in. I'm
we have plenty of
too
time.
excited. It's so funny that you use McDonald's as an example, because we use McDonald's as an example to explain how we enable businesses to be more life-centric. So we don't use the term empathy. The reason why we don't use the term empathy is because it's something from our perspective that can be faked. So if you think of empathy and you think of how you teach it as active listening. And often, if you teach someone to be empathic through like a stepwise process, it can be faked. But you can immediately pick up when someone is faking empathy. So we use the term humanness rather than empathy.
I love that.
And the McDonald's example is, if I'm showing empathy as the person taking an order, I say, "Oh, what would you like?" The person says what they would like. "Oh, would you like this?" Active listening. I'm repeating what they're saying. They feel heard. I heard what they wanted to order, and then they proceed to the next window. The difference between showing that empathy and showing humanness would be me receiving that, and the mom on the other side. So I'm a mom, so I've experienced this before. The mom on the other side is really in a rush, and you can see that she's quite stressed, and she's got 2 kids in the back. And you, as the employee giving that service, you might immediately think, if you're just trained on empathy, you're not trained to be human in that situation, you would look at that and go, "Oh, she's just in a rush. She just wants to get through the drive-through. We can get her to the drive-through as quickly as possible." Humanness is slightly different, though. Humanness is looking at the situation and understanding that the mom on the other side is probably in a hurry, not because she wants to get through the queue and she just wants to get home. It's more because the 2 kids in the back, the chances of my son changing his mind between the 2 windows is very high because he's 3. So the quicker I can get through, the lower the chance of him actually changing his mind. Now, to enable that, you need to show the person, and the person who's giving the service, you need to really empower them to have experienced that or have that penny drop, like we mentioned earlier. So it's not only, as you say, stepping into the shoes of the person, it's walking a mile in the shoes of the person. So when a mom comes through, and we do a lot of profiling, so what types of customers come through, how would they profile into different archetypes or personas, whichever you're doing, and then how would we actually approach them and treat them, but empowering the frontline staff member that potentially hasn't experienced that, so hasn't experienced having to go through the drive-through quickly because their son or daughter might change their mind quickly. How do we enable that experience and that understanding without them actually having lived it? I think that's actually the trick. Sorry, I'm asking and uncovering another question without having the answer.
We're all friends here. I think the point of that whole discussion is the reason why CXers are cool is we care about people.
Yeah.
And turning that caring into a business practice is not the easiest. It's not the easiest piece, but in some ways we've exhausted the amount of entertaining and educational moments that we can have with customers. There's just too many of them and too many of us doing them. So when we get a chance to feel something. And I think particularly in the context of the conversation of AI, feeling close to other people is probably a new frontier for business. It's kind of weird. All right, so tell me.
It's a weird one.
Yeah. So we're not going to. Well, if we saw that on this podcast,
We could sell the report.
Yeah. So you've heard us talk a lot about these things, but I'd love to take a minute to hear your perspective on what was said.
So if I think about the modeling which we've done, which really looks at service immersion and brand really driving loyalty, we can definitely see there's a higher correlation between immersion and loyalty rather than service into loyalty. Obviously, service and brand are quite interrelated, but what we've seen through the trends in results, which is across 27 different industries, and we measure over 200 companies and customer expectations, we can see that organizations do better in first contact resolution and resolving customer complaints. But if we look at the changing dynamics in terms of what customer needs are now, there really are gaps around value for money, product benefits perceived, which ultimately shows that customer expectations are different now to what they did before. And I think if we don't really stay abreast of what those are, we won't be able to emotionally fulfill the gaps. And industries are so interrelated as well. Being in a franchise restaurant industry, trends or expectations could be informed by building retail. Those are both industries which we saw excel in the latest benchmark results. But essentially, those expectations which customers have are formed through various different touch points and different industries. So I think it is important to look broad and look across life to influence loyalty.
Let me ask you some questions in that line of thinking. First of all, I'll say it. This is my podcast. I can say whatever I want to say. And it can be, people can hate it or love it. But what we're talking about here, it has the potential to dismantle the notion of personas as the keystone of mapping. So you heard it. I said it.
Yes.
You guys didn't have to say it. But I also want to touch on what you said, Maria, about these multiple touch points. And I want to tell you, I had a chance to interview the head of one of the heads of experience at Expo in Dubai. It was a $23 billion customer experience. And a woman there was in charge of certain experiences. And I asked her, I said, what is what's one of the most profound insights you have around these experiences and what they mean to people? And she said, and it's along the lines of what you were talking about, is she said one of the most fascinating things for her to watch is they're starting from, this is the best experience you'll ever have. So let's just get that out there. So it's not really about the destination of the experience, because they're like, we've made sure it's perfect. No. Here's where I'm going. That's why I wanted to bring it up. She said, when a mother and a daughter go into the experience, they come in two different personas or archetypes, but they come out the same from the shared experience.
It's the outcome. It's the impact that you have on a person's life. Yeah.
But back to the emotion. See, they're contextualizing it with a dual emotional experience between a parent and a child that has been crafted for that moment in time. So you get a emotional trigger at a specific moment in time that's synchronized with someone who they love and that shared experience. Now, they weren't doing it to monetize it, but there is an example of how behavioral science and, if we think about quantitative as what's happening now, and maybe qualitative is what's led us to this place, this new thing, this emotional building block that they take with them is identical, but they both take it back into their own journeys. It's a fascinating perspective on, to your point. I'm just catching back up to you. To your point is, what do you do after the experience?
Yeah. I think that what you've said actually relates back to your introduction in terms of the definition of customer experience. And what I've just realized as you were talking was often as CX professionals, we're so focused on the journey. We're focused on, okay, so we're moving this customer from point A to point B. But if we genuinely care about our role and how, as a business or as experience experts, what we're doing impacts the experience, how that person is experiencing their life and the outcome how they're post the experience, how they're living. It's a very different view of it. It's a very different approach. And I think that you can only get it right if you genuinely care about that person. So if you genuinely care about your customers beyond your business, so beyond, and it links back to what we termed life-centric. So you can see a lot of businesses doing it now. A lot of businesses are moving from the industry that they're in into other industries because they're not only trying to drive their business through different means, so through bringing in driving switching or driving penetration into other industries, but they're also doing it because they're trying to become more life-centric. So if ease is most important, having everything from your finances to your insurance to your telecommunications in one easy-to-use app is maybe the ideal, because then it's really easy and it's life-centric. Yeah. But are we in that process, are businesses in that process genuinely caring about the customer and how we're making their lives easier and their lives better, what that outcome is, what post the journey? And I suppose it's how it's not only the strategy that you're developing, it's implementation of the strategy. Because if you're implementing your strategy and your strategy is founded in genuinely caring about the outcome you're creating for your customer and the role that you're playing in their lives, then the implementation becomes important because your strategy is right.
So you're making me think about something highly personal, and I'd be very curious to what the science says about this. But you made me think about, one, you're opening my eyes to a whole new perspective of CX, which is why I love and appreciate and grateful for these conversations. I think about I think about my own approach to CX, and this, you call it humanism. What do you? Humanness. Yeah. So here's a humanness. I've been with the same woman for 35 years. I think we're going to have our 30th wedding anniversary soon. And I just, as you were talking about it, it was coming to me, one of the secrets to our success. And interestingly enough, I'm still very close with all of my ex-girlfriends. So we're Facebook friends. They talk to my wife. I didn't lose the humanness of it. And I think the reason why is whenever I got into a romantic relationship, the first thing I focused on setting up was the breakup. I was like, listen, we don't know where this is going, but let's make sure at the beginning we preserve the end, because what we don't want to do is wander into destruction. Like, let's check in, and at some point you're going to have a feeling that maybe I'm not the guy, or I'm going to have the feeling, and we have an opportunity to work on it then. But we have a safe space to say, we agreed going in that we were going to make the end great. And so as a consequence, when the relationships went different ways, there was like a mutual respect. But my wife, every time we got to this, I don't think you're really the guy I was really hoping for. I had an alert early on to say, I can fix that, you know? So I think that it's very interesting to consider that the most important part of customer experience strategy is when the journey is over. You know, when you're going to lose the client. So can we all just get in a room and say, we're going to acquire clients, but we're going to lose clients. Let's make those breakups the best possible breakups for them and work backwards from there. You know? What would you have to say about that?
I think it's really important just to continuously check in. And I think ultimately being able to build trust, I think throughout the process, I think that's actually critical to building an outcome that's a win-win ultimately for all. And I think just keeping in touch with needs on each end, I think that is also critical to success essentially.
Yeah. So
Can I ask a question? And I may be probing a little bit further into that personal story, but why was it important for you to almost prep that? The reason for my question is not to get very, very personal. It's more relating to if we uncover the why behind approaching it in that way, it would potentially inform businesses differently, because we don't necessarily want to prep for the breakup. We want to almost adapt what you've just said into changing the approach in the experience, but also the approach and the outcome of the experience.
I think it's healthy to try to unpack my personal relationships. You know, I would say that okay, wow. So this is why CX is hard. I think the reason for it was to share a common destination. And by having a North Star of some point, the check-ins allowed the relationship to, for the journey to be, have more trust, but more transparency, more...
To recover. Maybe to recover, because I guess at some point there's a disconnect.
Yeah, and to almost pivot. It sounds like a pivot point.
But also to your point in brands, I think what it does is it removes the expectation for the other part of it to solve. It says, we're going to take each foot goes and we do it together, because back to the emotional thing, it's a negative emotion to assume the destination with a customer and assume what they need or assume what they need to have or should do. I think when you say, I'm not going to get it right at some point, and I just want to acknowledge that, there is a why that says the relationship matters.
Yeah, I think you're right. And you're reminding me of a conversation I had recently about how certain experiences are shifting. So the expectations of experience have shifted. So beforehand, it used to be that speed that Maria mentioned, and now it's changed to something like convenience. The conversation that I recently had, and it was more from a business to business perspective, was around, it's not how quickly you can do something, it's the quality of the journey that we're walking together. So yes, I might be able to work with another business that can do something in 2 days, but the quality of the relationship that I have with them isn't strong. And the strength that they were speaking about was keeping me up to date through that journey and sort of walking with me through it. So yes, we might only be able to get back to you in 5 days, but I will keep you updated and be transparent with you through that. And what it's almost making me think about is people used to speak about the human race. And if you look at the human race, it implies it's a race. We need to get to the finish as quickly as possible. And that's changing completely. We're not trying to race and get to the finish as quickly as possible. We're trying to, and especially younger people, they're taking it in. If you look at a lot of simplifying lives so that we can experience life differently. I also think, we were having a conversation coming over here. If you're getting excited. If you look at what COVID did, it made us all slow down. 2020 was a full slowdown from a year perspective. People reevaluated where they place value. So do I value work? Is it a race? I'm trying to get to the end. My career needs to progress. Or is it the quality time that I'm spending with the people that are important? And businesses need to shift in that regard as well. Not only from a customer perspective, from an employee perspective. If we look at work from home, what was work from home enabling? A different quality of life. And yes, no, work from home doesn't work for everyone, but it's almost giving that flexibility in terms of the freedom to choose how your life and how you experience your life plays out. And as a customer too, yeah.
I have two phrases that are things that go through my mind a lot. Is the Marines, the U.S. Marines say, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. So that's about that quality thing.
Yes.
But I have a personal mantra about the human race,
yeah,
which is sort of interesting hearing you say it, which is copycats finish last in the human race.
Sure. Something to take in. Yeah.
Because when you're on your own race, you're always first. But when you copy or you emulate, you're always behind. The race is timeless.
Yeah.
So anyway, Maria, I want to hear more from you, sis. Come on, give it to us. So let's shift gears. I would love to hear at least one of your core beliefs about CX so we can unpack.
I think it's really important always to be checking in. And I think one of the beautiful bits of the research which we do is we keep it as broad as possible to ensure that we don't miss something. Because I think one of the worst things to do is actually to be implementing a tactical measure which is trying to measure the wrong things. And I think if we look at where service organizations are falling short, it's really about delivering quality or value or product benefits as per customer expectations. And if we don't know what those actually are, because of the changing dynamics, because expectations are influenced by so many different elements, I think we could constantly be missing the mark. And if we don't know our customer intimately and not knowing how to service them, how could we make it a more human experience?
I love that. Now let me unpack. Let's dive in. A couple of things you said. One, that's terrifying, and then two, and I want to make it less scary. That one is the more we know about customers, the better we can get them to do what we want. Which I think you don't mean it like that, but in this age of data invasion, I think there's a new era of knowledge and data around customers that has to be more enlightened than just this stuff we see on TV, about that's negative. I think so. There's that. But I also think that, my little sayings. I have another saying. If you interrogate the data long enough, it'll tell you anything you want to hear. And so, correct me if I'm wrong, when you're measuring, and I think a lot of people can just hear that you measure a lot and just, I think most people can say that and they'll lump that into whatever their belief system is. But what I think I heard you say was you measure a spectrum, the wider the spectrum, the more points that you have, the more correlating points you can see. And it's the higher level or the higher number of correlations that you see from the wider spectrum that start to reveal a truth that is beyond the interrogation of data or reporting. Am I in the right conversation here?
Yeah, I think the way in which we describe it often is you could look at the data and just look at the frequencies, and absolutely they could tell a story, but we could be so misled by those frequencies by not understanding the relationships between all of the different elements. And I think that unpacks the truth in actually understanding what a core priority is for a customer segment or grouping, which may not necessarily show up in the frequency. So it's really through the interrogation, the linking, the relationships, the regressions between all of the different elements which tell us what customers really want.
So can I nerd out a little more with you on this topic? What the listeners can't see is your body language and the intuition that I have just about your demeanor. I would say that you strike me as a curious yet cautious archetype. That you're fine to take the leap of faith, but you don't worry ever about the leap of faith. But you sure would like to understand exactly which faith we're leaping from, and that's fine. The reason I say that is because I think that I sense this earnestness in you, and I want to tell you this about the data, because there are a whole bunch of people out there talking the same story that use a lot of the same words, and people's cognitive overload can only take so much. So people like yourself, I feel like their voices get caught in the upper crust of like bullshit, and you have something you want to say below. So I want to share some data philosophies of mine to give you a chance to articulate maybe your perspectives on how I personally relate to what you're saying and get after the truths. Okay, the truth of the faith. Personas are the superficial grouping, and data points of all kinds are superficial groupings. And so this is just Dennis's version, but how I try to find that truth is by one metric and one metric alone, and that metric is time. So let me unpack that. I grew up in a digital background, and I tried forever to solve the true nature of a customer journey. So when you think of a phone tree, press 1 for banking, 2 for loans, 3 for Spanish. You can see that data, you can see that line, and that is a very quantifiable journey, and you can measure those at scale. Okay. But what that won't tell you is the correlation between that phone tree and this person's social media presence or this person's buying behavior. And so what I did for the better part of 2 years was hunt down my own truth. And I reached into my background, and I realized that on a web server and a social media server and an ad server and any other server, you could strip away everything from all that, and you could take the log files from each of them and put them into one sequential time period. By doing that one sequence and then reattaching the metadata, you could actually see at any given time where the journey really was. The journey goes backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards and around and about. And so then I did a project where I ingested 10 terabytes of data from a web server, a point of sale system, a loyalty card, an email system, and the ERP product inventory and supply and shipping. So you're nerding out with me?
Yeah.
Okay. So then I could see the relationships, the truth between the distance of supply chain and product and the shipping to locations. So I could see where the inventory should have been as a truth. And I think those are the things that you are also revealing. But I'd like to hear in your words, your version of that.
So probably how my understanding of linking different data points together is by being able to ask a customer a whole bunch of questions around his or her behavior, by also understanding her or him from a demographic and a psychographic perspective, ultimately to understand what those trigger points are or which elements actually resonate with them on a personal perspective or a values perspective, essentially to enable an organization, a servicing organization, to be able to resonate with those points. But through understanding their behavior, understanding touch points, understanding who they are ultimately, to know what makes them tick from a customer experience perspective to enable that engagement and emotional connection and trust.
Maybe
Yeah. Can I jump in there real fast?
Go.
Thank you. I'm sorry, my manners, but I need to just connect. So again, you've gone one level deeper, but I can tell that you've tried to have this conversation with so many people and they just drift off and they don't get it. But I'm still with you at this next level. My keynote is about exactly what you just said on Wednesday morning. So here's you're right. You're real right. So my keynote is going to explain how qualitative data gives us a view of the past and quantitative data gives us a view of the present. But value data gives us a view of the future. And here's how I know it. I'm in a collaboration with the guy, David Allison, who surveyed 1 million people around the world on their values and figured out in this data, and because Global Voice of CX, I'm bringing the key values of the major parts of the world to the conference to explain them. And so one of the realizations, here's some of the key points. The US, their value is well-being. If you look at the rest of North America without the US, their values are basic needs. If you go through that whole side of the world, you go down to South America, in South America, they value tradition. So when you want to cut through the demographics, the psychographics, the time codes and all this, and you want to have one opportunity to have a message, the value of tradition, those terms and ideas will resonate with that group. And if you want to know what Africa is the land of patience. That's the value. It's the thing that insulates, preserves, protects, and it's the source of the resilience. So how does that hit you?
Yeah, I do think even if you look at the core of a relationship, I think make or break is essentially in the values and the values alignment or misalignment. Probably have a personal story to write against there as well. But essentially, absolutely, I think it's all around the values essentially, which makes for a true and holistic relationship and ultimately the loyalty. And I completely agree on the elements around South Africa. I think we persevere, we're resilient, we stick through. And I think the patience is definitely one of the virtues which differentiate us as a nation.
Yes. So the personal story, I'll tell you. Not my story, but David's story. David was a researcher, and his job was to get people to get into a room and buy things. And he did it, very successful at getting a room full of people to buy stuff. But what he started to realize is even though he was really good at it, there was something about this room that they weren't all the same demographic and they weren't all the same. The group that purchased, they were not all the same measures that were. So he realized they had the same values. They were there. They all got the same value from the purchase. And then where the epiphany hit him that he really had to do this work was he was out at a pub or a bar or whatever lounge you want to call it. He and two of his friends were there. And they've been drinking. They're having a great time all night together. This relationship you're talking about. So that's the make part of the relationship. The bar closed. They were leaving and they're all going to head home. And as they were walking home, there was this dark alley corridor that they could go down. And, David's like, let's go. We'll be home early. We can get some food, whatever. Let's just dart through this dark alley. And his other friend was like, whoa, we're having a great time. Like, why would we, what if something's down there that stops this? And the other friend was like, I couldn't care less which one of these you pick. Let's just pick one. And what he realized is the value for adventure or the value for safety or the value for friendship, that is the break part of it.
It is the break part of it, and it's so difficult, essentially. And even though sometimes it looks like a value is consistent or common, sometimes when posed in a situation where customers or people need to make a choice, I think that's when the true value actually comes out, and it can be a make or a break point. Yeah,
that's right. And to our earlier conversation, what's interesting about what we've said is when the mother and the daughter go into that experience and they come out with this shared value, that's really beautiful. A gold thing. Now, my apologies. Please jump in. She touched on my keynote and I was thinking, here it is. It is relevant. I'm not going to bomb on stage, and I get a chance to practice a couple of the stories. So I appreciate it.
So what I was going to say was we've got a wealth of data through Target Group Index, our Target Group Index. It represents 28 million South Africans, and there's actually a segmentation in it that speaks to whether South Africans are traditionalists or independents or utopians or virtuous, and it actually links back to their values. And what we do for a lot of our clients is we actually analyze that for their brands in comparison to their competitors, different industries, to actually enable growth through, so we call it a gap and feasibility analysis. So we look at the gap. So what is the gap in terms of who your customers are versus who your competitors' customers are? And what sort of communication do you need to put out there to attract a different set of customers with a different set of values, whilst not alienating your current? So I was just going to mention that if you need some data for your keynote, we can do a little bit of an analysis for you and send that through to you, and you can add it in. We can probably pull in. We've got everything from whether South Africans like eating chocolate in secret through to, yes, absolutely everything. And it's trended.
Okay, awesome. Awesome.
I thought you would get excited.
But is it consistent with my keynote? That's what I want to make sure. That truth, that truth linkage, is it there?
Yeah, so we can definitely have a look. I didn't see patients specifically, but I'm pretty sure it will come out because, as Maria mentioned, it's definitely something we see.
Let me just tell you, we're all friends here, and back to helping you be heroes of your own journey. I'd be happy to include one slide that, as I tell the story, say I had this conversation last night, mention your report and you, and thank you for this corroborating piece of data.
We'll send it through for you, definitely. And we'll trend it for you so you can see. So one of the things that we were interested in, because globally, if you look at people that are utopians, so caring about more than myself, basically, something like caring about the environment or sustainability has that increase. And globally, you saw the massive trends shift where people are sort of, they've moved up Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you use that as your base, they're moving towards self-actualization, and now they can start caring about things like, okay, the environment, the bigger factors in it. But if you look at South Africans, there was a slight shift in utopian, so there was a slight increase trended over time. People focusing a little bit more, wanting a little bit more in terms of the environment or caring about sustainability. But it wasn't as big as global. And if you think about it, just from a needs perspective, it's because for the majority of South Africans, basic needs aren't being fulfilled. So how from a society perspective, how can they care, or how can we care about things that are beyond ourselves if we're just surviving? A lot of our population is literally just surviving. So it's quite important to look at things like that before making big business changes in terms of, let's speak about sustainability and let's speak about the environment, where maybe we should be speaking about just needs, fulfilling needs as a starting point. But we can definitely pull a slide together for you. Yeah.
That would be so nice. What a great collaboration. And on that note, here's the last question. I want to ask you both, if you had one thing you could say to the world, what would it be?
I think build on truth. I think implement strategies which make a difference, which add value, which build relationships which are human, and ultimately build on truth.
Fair.
I think on my side, it's something that I'm very passionate about. And I think that if everyone believes this and fully just takes it in, I think that we can make a very big ripple effect through businesses and through South Africa and through the world potentially. And it's a quote that one of my clients reminded me of, and I've mentioned it to you earlier, but I'll say it again. Your frontline staff, the staff that are interacting with your customers, they're the only protection, the only defense that your business has against your complex systems. So really prioritize them, treat them the way that you want to be treated, and look at their experience and look at how you're enabling them to give the experience you're expecting them to give.
Perfect. All right. Thank you both for being on CX in the Wild.
Thank you. This is very exciting.
A lot of fun. Thank you, Janice.
Thanks for tuning in to CX in the Wild. If you'd like to be on the show, connect with us through the link in the description or DM Dennis on LinkedIn.